In this lesson, we're going to look at Pythagoras' theorem. So basically, Pythagoras was a famous Greek mathematician who discovered a famous connection between the three sides of any right angle triangle. We're going to explore this in this lesson and come up with a formula for Pythagoras, the one that Pythagoras created. So before we do that, we need to understand what certain things are in mathematics, the first of which is squaring a number. So when you're squaring a number, this means that you're multiplying the number by itself. So squaring a number like 8, the square of 8 is really just 8 times 8, which is 64. The most common mistake is people double it to get 16. Now the reason for this is because there's a certain way of writing 8 squared. You can write it like that, 8 squared equals 8 times 8, or most often it's seen like this, 8 and a wee 2 high up. This is really a power, so 8 to the power of 2, or 8 squared means 8 times 8. And this is the reason people double it, because they think that's multiplied by 2, but it's not. It signifies you to times the number by itself. So 3 squared would be 3 times 3, which is 9. 2 squared would be 2 times 2, which is 4. 7 squared would be 7 times 7, which is 49, and so on. Now the area of a square can also be calculated using this formula here. If one of the lengths is L, then the area of a square is L times L, which can be written as L squared. Now on your calculator, there's a number of ways to find the square of a number. You can just type 8 times 8 in, or you could type 8 and then hit this button if you have a scientific calculator. You could type 8 and then this y to the x button, and then 2, that means to the power of 2, and it should come out as 64. Or you could type 8 in, and then there's this wee kind of hat button up in the small buttons in your calculator, and then type 2, hit equals, and it should square the number. Now in mathematics, there's usually inverse functions, and the opposite of squaring is something called square rooting. Just like the opposite of adding is taking away and multiplication is divide, the opposite of squaring a number is square rooting. So if you think of the, again, 8 times 8 makes 64. If we want to reverse the process and think which number multiplied by itself equals 64, then this is really the square root of 64. The button in your calculator to square root a number is this wee kind of tick shape. Sometimes there's a wee tick and a wee box underneath, but if you click that first and then type 64, you should get 8. Some calculators you type 64, then push this button, and it will pop out to be 8. So the square root of 100 would be 10, square root of 81 would be 9, the square root of 49 would be 7, the square root of 16 would be 4, and so on. The square root of 4 would be 2. What number multiplied by itself equals that number? Some square roots do not give exact values. Anything that's not a square number, for example, something like the square root of 7, we'll talk about that later, not at this point in time.